at noon. But joining us now in the studio, Dr. Jennifer Bryan, Mississippi State Medical Association Board of Trustees President Elect. Is that right?
That's
You're the
right.
President-elect?
Yeah.
All right, good.
Thanks
So wanted to have you coming in today to first give us an update on the COVID situation. We're seeing some degree of an increase in hospitalizations and cases in general. Still seem to be lagging in terms of the count of those being admitted to the hospital with COVID. Seems to be sort of well below where we were this time last year, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
As we expected and thankfully, right? Yeah.
And best I can tell, just from talking to folks in the medical profession, the cases don't seem to be as severe.
So when you compare it to flu, you're still looking at about 3 times the hospitalizations. So it's still an issue that we need to contend with, just as a people. But
Sure.
But definitely we're in a much better situation. Viruses, as they evolve, tend to generally get weaker, and of course with the vaccine immunity and some level of, I guess, herd immunity is not exactly the right word, but some, previous exposures and so on, we're doing much better with dealing with the virus. So it's a nuisance and it's still there. And some people, sadly, are seriously affected. But the main thing I think I hear from most people is they don't want to miss school or work or vacations. So they're looking at it more like the flu shot these days and really just taking general precautions to stay well and avoid it.
But in terms of the progression, this seems to be consistent with what most scientists and virologists, et cetera, people that study this sort of stuff, this is kind of what they predicted.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, it's going to be with us. And just like the flu, years you may see kind of a worse year than others as mutations happen. But generally, it's going to evolve to be better and better. Yeah.
All right. But, historically, there's been sort of a limited assortment of drug therapies available.
Right.
And, something I remember early on was maybe a bit of a rush to put more critical cases on ventilators.
Yeah.
And then it seemed like we got to the point where that was not considered necessarily the best approach, even with super severe cases.
Yes.
That, in fact, some of my doctor buddies said if they get to the ventilator stage, and this was way beyond sort of the peak period, if they get to that, probably aren't going to make it out of it.
Yeah, you're bringing back some emotions with some of this. That was a hard time. I mean,
Yeah.
that really was, and you hated that. There just was not much to do. And thankfully, this is 2023 and not 2020. But we had no innate immunity to that's why it's called novel.
Yeah.
But it's we're better now. But still, it'd be nice to have we've got Paxlovid, but it's fraught with issues. To have a Tamiflu type product is what we're talking about. Something to nip it in the bud, and there's some cool stuff on the horizon.
All right. So the good news is that there's a new AI generated therapy, a drug that is in phase 1 clinical trials with the FDA. I believe this is a pill form. Type medicine.
So it's really interesting. Read up some about this weekend. Again, phase 1. So for those who aren't familiar with the clinical trial process, you've got phase 1, then phase 2, then phase 3 to really see that this to fruition. But they're involving AI this time. And you and I were talking at the break about it's been about 22 years since the human genome was sequenced.
Right.
And so we're able to use that with targets of where we know the virus may bind, and then also the genomics of the virus itself, where we can target actual proteins. And we all talked about the spike protein as a target. We became familiar with that terminology. But we're really getting nuanced with AI, just sitting around and generating known proteins and what can bind what, to where they found a product that they believe can target all COVID variants.
Right.
So wouldn't that be fascinating and wonderful if that could come through?
Comes from In Silico Medicine. This is a biotech company based in Hong Kong, also has offices in New York City. And they're the ones who made this announcement of their new drug, COVID-19. It's in phase 1 clinical trials. Now, explain what that means exactly, Dr. Bryan. What is the sequence, phase 1, to get it onto the market?
Right. So they're varying stages, and they're just a very set thing with the FDA and the criteria. So phase 1 is just the beginning where you kind of have your hypothesis, and we remember that from science days.
Sure.
And then you're enrolling, and you're looking for a certain type of patient. So I would suppose in this one it would be someone with COVID, right? And there's a lot of safety. This is where you, depending on the type, and there's all different kinds of trials trials, but whether someone gets a placebo or not or so on. And I didn't look into the specifics of this one. But anyway, that's where you have your broader population and you test your hypothesis. Mm-hmm. And then depending on if you do well enough, you advance to the next phase. And in those situations, you get kind of a more targeted population, a targeted therapy. By the time it gets through phase 3, you've really proven the safety. And so, you may start out, sometimes they'll do animal studies, sometimes they'll do, in vitro studies, but eventually you're testing these on humans. You've determined the safety and that it is safe to clear and then approved for general use.
All right. So is there like a time frame that you would be in each of these phases, or does it just vary depending on the success in the specific phase to advance to the next phase?
So if you really want to check these things out, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov and see every single clinical trial that's out there. And there are varying timelines on all of these things, whether you're combating cancer or COVID or depression or what you're interested in. There are different timelines for all of these things because you may be dealing with a really rare genetic disorder and it takes you 10 years to get enough people to prove that something works versus COVID where you can find somebody on every corner. So the timeline has a lot of variables. And if it was 2020, well, everybody in the world was staring at just COVID pretty much. Things now, the researchers are looking at all different things. And that's a good pivot place to talk about. Not only are we treating COVID with this AI technology, but everything. Yeah. I mean, it's just amazing what can happen from this type technology when you use AI appropriately.
Yeah. Speeds up just anything, any task, certainly, and just does those tasks much faster than humans could. Something else that I've read quite a bit about that I think is going to really benefit the pharmaceutical industry and just the quest for new therapies, new drugs is quantum computing, which is just super incredibly fast to compute. So the combination of quantum computing on a compute side, hardware side, and software coming from artificial intelligence is incredibly powerful combination, and the expectation is pretty high as far as the new drugs we made, new therapies and new treatments.
Right. And also you're talking about once you get past the initial expense, you can generate these therapies. And so you can see where a lot of the expense is cut back to on the computer doing the research for you about what would work. And the models also are now predicting, all right, so you've got an idea, you think this protein may work, it'll predict probabilities of that it would work, that it would pass phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials, that it would even get approved so that you could decide if you even wanted to invest in it. I mean, a completely different side of it. So there's really so many different ways this place goes. But I think the low-hanging fruit are, the viruses. We see that become a threat internationally. We see something like, what are we going to do? We don't want to be in the same situation we were last time. So this is a proactive way. Cancer, that's probably going to be the biggest place. And then everything, literally everything. But cancer, I look to see great strides on that front with AI and with genomics.
Diabetes, probably.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've always thought, if we could figure out a way, and this may be kind of an old style of thinking, if we could figure out a way to effectively and cost efficiently clone a pancreas and transplant it to address the diabetes problem, which last I checked is one of every $8 of medical costs is driven by diabetes.
I believe it. You sound like we used to have these conversations growing up, and I remember my dad talking about what a big deal it was when they sequenced the human genome. Yeah. And I was coming along, and I was like, no, but it totally is. I mean, it's just exploded the scene about the possibility. It's something to get excited about. AI needs guardrails. I'll just say, all those things. But I think we've got so much sickness in Mississippi. We've got so many issues with the obesity epidemic that this is a really positive thing for all of us to look forward to.
And this is pill form drug, this new AI generated COVID treatment.
I think this is not anything that's going to be available to us this year or probably next or even the next, but in the coming years, you can see where you don't want to miss work. You've got COVID, isolation guidelines have gotten better. You just want to take a pill and get back to your life. You can see where something like this would just be wonderful to have in your toolbox.
I think there's more coming. I've often shared a report before we go here about some scientists that are working on some sort of sensor that you would implant and the pulmonary artery, I believe it is, that could detect the so-called Widowmaker heart attack within 48 hours of it happening.
Isn't
Based
that
on the
amazing?
O2 level, and it would send a signal, said you need to go get this taken care of right now to avoid what usually is a deadly heart attack.
I believe it. COVID boosters are available now, though, and until this amazing drug is out there, please consider getting it for yourself and your
Dr.
family.
Jennifer Bryan's been our guest on Middays. Appreciate it, Doc. Thank
Thanks.
you. Coming right back.